There is a question that has haunted philosophers, troubled scientists, and quietly unsettled ordinary people sitting alone with their thoughts late at night. It is not a question about distant galaxies or the mathematics of quantum fields. It is a question about you, about where you came from, about why you believe the things you believe with such absolute unshakable conviction, and about what it might mean if the answer to that question has less to do with truth and more to do with the postcode you were assigned at birth. I want to be honest with you from the very beginning. This is not a comfortable journey, but I promise you it is a worthwhile one, because the question we're about to follow together, carefully, without rushing, without agenda, is one of the most illuminating questions a human being can ask. Not because it destroys anything, but because it opens something that, once opened, makes the world simultaneously more mysterious and more beautiful than it was before. So let us begin. Not with ancient texts, not with laboratories, not with statistics. Let us begin with something much simpler. Let us begin with a child. Imagine a child born in a hospital in Cairo, another child born on the same day in a hospital in Oslo, a third arriving into the world in the city of Mumbai. Lie these three children side by side in their cribs and look at them honestly. In every biological sense that matters, they are essentially identical in their potential. Their brains, those astonishing and improbable structures of roughly 86 billion neurons each, arrive with the same fundamental architecture, the same raw capacity for language, the same appetite for pattern and meaning, the same emotional range, the same broad intellectual gifts. They cry the same way. They reach for warmth the same way. They hunger and sleep and dream, as far as we can tell, in ways that are far more similar than different. And yet, with an almost mechanical predictability, we can say something about the beliefs these children are likely to hold by the time they are 30 years old, not because of anything written in their genes, not because of any inherent difference in their intelligence or their spiritual sensitivity or their moral character, but simply, almost mundanely, because of where they were born. This is not a trivial observation. I want to resist the temptation to rush past it because it deserves to be felt before it is analyzed. The child in Cairo will, in all statistical likelihood, grow up Muslim. The child in Oslo will, with high probability, grow up in a broadly Christian or post-Christian secular framework. The child in Mumbai will most probably grow up Hindu. Each of them will feel, with profound and genuine sincerity, that their inherited worldview is not merely one option among many, but the natural, obvious, self-evident description of reality. Each of them will likely feel, at some level, that people who believe differently are the ones who need to explain themselves. And here is the thing that I find genuinely moving about this, not in a dismissive way, but in a deeply human way. They will all be right about the feeling. The feeling certainty is real. The feeling of meaning is real. The sense of connection to something larger than oneself is a genuine psychological and even physiological experience. What the geography of belief invites us to ask is not whether those feelings are real, but what those feelings are actually tracking, whether the feeling of truth and the condition of truth are reliably the same thing. To understand why geography shapes belief so powerfully, we need to think about what a human brain actually is and what it was shaped to do over the long, impersonal history of evolution. Because here is something that the science of evolutionary biology reveals with remarkable clarity, and it is something that changes how you see almost everything once you have really taken it in. The brain is not, in any straightforward sense, a truth-seeking device. It was not designed, because of course it was not designed at all, to produce accurate models of reality for their own sake. It was sculpted over millions of years by natural selection, and the criterion for success was never accuracy. The criterion was survival. The criterion was passing genes into the next generation. A brain that helped its owner survive long enough to reproduce was a brain that proliferated. A brain that produced beautifully coherent models of reality but got its owner killed in the process was, in the cold arithmetic of evolution, a failure. And this means that the human mind comes preloaded with a set of tendencies and shortcuts and biases that were adaptive in the ancestral environment, but that do not automatically lead us toward truth in the modern world. Consider one of the most consequential of these tendencies. Human beings are, by the deep logic of our evolutionary history, extraordinarily prone to seeing patterns, and especially to seeing agency and intention behind events. Research in the cognitive science of religion sometimes call this the hyperactive agency detection device, a somewhat inelegant phrase for a genuinely elegant idea. The logic runs like this. Imagine one of your distant ancestors standing at the edge of a clearing. There is a rustle in the long grass. Now, there are two possibilities. The rustle is caused by the wind, or the rustle is caused by a predator. If your ancestor assumes predator and runs, and the rustle was just wind, they have lost nothing but a few seconds of foraging time and perhaps a moment of dignity. If your ancestor assumes wind and the rustle was actually a lion, they have lost everything. Their genes do not appear in future generations. Natural selection, therefore, built brains that err heavily and consistently on the side of seeing agency, seeing intention, seeing a mind behind events. We see faces in clouds. We feel that meaningful coincidences are not coincidences. We sense that when good things happen after we perform a certain ritual, the ritual caused the good thing. We instinctively attribute illness, misfortune, natural disaster, and unexpected death to the intentions of some agent. Not because we are foolish, but because we are the descendants of ancestors whose survival depended on exactly this tendency. We are the lucky inheritors of a hyperactive pattern recognition system, and that system does not switch itself off simply because we have moved out of the savannah and into the modern world. Now add to this another feature of human cognition that is, if anything, even more consequential for our question. Human beings are, by any reasonable measure, the most intensely social species this planet has ever produced. And crucially, we are social ought through rigid instinct like ants or bees, but through flexible, learned, culturally transmitted behavior. For a species like ours, one of the most important things a young brain must accomplish is the rapid absorption of the norms, values, beliefs, and frameworks of the community into which it is born. This is not a flaw. It is a feature. A child that arrived in the world questioning every social norm and every inherited belief would be a child incapable of functioning within the group, and for most of human evolution history. Being excluded from the group was not a philosophical inconvenience, it was death. And so the young human brain is built to absorb. It is built to receive the culture around it with trust, with openness, with what you might call a beautiful and necessary vulnerability. Children believe what their parents tell them, not because they are gullible, but because statistically and historically, trusting the accumulated wisdom of your community was an excellent survival strategy. The problem arises not from the mechanism itself, but from the fact that this same mechanism, this same deep receptivity, absorbs true things and false things with equal efficiency. It absorbs the knowledge of which plants are poisonous and which are edible. It absorbs the skills of language and social cooperation. And it absorbs cosmologies, creation stories, moral frameworks, and metaphysical claims about the nature of the universe, all with the same uncritical, trusting openness. By the time the critical faculties begin to develop, the framework is already in place. And here is the deeply important thing about that. A framework absorbed before the critical faculties are mature does not feel like a framework. It feels like reality itself. It is the water you swim in, and you cannot see water when you have always been submerged in it. This is where geography enters. Our story with such striking clarity. For most of human history, the transmission of culture was almost entirely local. You learned what your parents believed. Your parents learned what their parents believed. The stories, the rituals, the cosmologies, the moral architectures, all of it passed from generation to generation within a community, shaped by the particular landscape, the particular climate, the particular historical experiences. And and the particular challenges of that group of people. A community living in a harsh desert environment might develop very different ideas about scarcity, hospitality, and the nature of a demanding and just God than a community living in a lush, abundant forest. A community that has experienced centuries of oppression and displacement might develop a theology of deliverance and divine justice that speaks with profound power to the lived experience. A community organized around agriculture might develop rituals tied to the cycles of seasons and harvest in ways that a nomadic herding community would not recognize or need. What we are witnessing when we map the distribution of beliefs across the surface of the earth is not the distribution of truth. We are witnessing the distribution of culturally adaptive ideas, ideas that solve particular problems for particular people in particular places, ideas that provided meaning where meaning was desperately needed, but ideas that bound communities together with shared narrative and shared ritual, ideas that worked in the specific evolutionary and cultural sense of the word worked for the people who held them, and the geography of those ideas reflects with remarkable fidelity the geography of the human experiences that gave rise to them. Let us pause here because intellectual honesty genuinely demands it, and I think it is one of the most important pauses in this entire discussion. This observation, powerful as it is, does not by itself tell us whether any particular belief is true or false. It tells us something about how beliefs come to be held. It tells us about the mechanism of transmission, but the mechanism of transmission and the truth value of the transmitted belief are separate questions, and conflating them is a genuine philosophical error. This error even has a name. It is called the genetic fallacy, the mistake of assuming that because you can explain how a belief arose, you have thereby shown the belief to be wrong. We need to hold this distinction carefully. The fact that your belief in the germ theory of disease was transmitted to you by your culture does not mean that germs do not cause disease. What the observation does invite us to examine, however, is the epistemology of certainty. The question of how beliefs come to feel self-evidently true. Because the child who grows up in Cairo and the child who grows up in Oslo are not merely acquiring different beliefs, they're acquiring different lenses through which all subsequent evidence is filtered, different frameworks through which all subsequent experience is interpreted. And both of them, if asked in adulthood, will experience their own framework not as a lens, but as direct, unmediated access to the way things obviously. Here is a thought experiment that I find genuinely useful, not as a rhetorical trick, but as a sincere invitation to reflection. Take any person of deep, sincere religious faith. Take any person of deep, sincere religious faith. Someone whose faith is not merely social habit, but genuine conviction. Lived daily, felt deeply in moments of joy and grief and silence. Now imagine that you could replay the universe from the moment just before they were born and place them instead in a different country, a different culture, a different family with a different tradition. With very high probability they would grow up with an entirely different set of sincere, deeply felt religious convictions, the same intensity of experience, the same quality of certainty, the same sense of personal encounter with the sacred, all pointing in a completely different direction. This does not prove that religious belief is false. I want to be clear about that, but it does invite us to ask very carefully and very honestly what the difference is between a belief feeling true and a belief being true. And if the subjective feeling of certainty is so thoroughly determined by the accident of birthplace, what relationship does that feeling bear to the actual structure of reality? Science, that strange and beautiful and profoundly human enterprise, developed precisely as an attempt to answer this kind of question, or more precisely, as an attempt to build methods of inquiry that could function independently of the particular cultural frameworks of the inquirers. Scientific method is, in one deep sense, a set of tools designed to help human beings escape the limitations of their own evolved psychology. Peer review replication, the systematic attempt to falsify rather than confirm one's own hypotheses, controlled experiments, blind and double-blind testing protocols. These are not natural tendencies of the human mind. They go sharply against the grain of how our brains naturally operate. They represent a hard-won, genuinely difficult cultural achievement, a set of social practices laboriously constructed to filter out the wishful thinking, the confirmation bias, the tendency to see what we already expect and want to see. And the remarkable, verifiable, testable fact is that they work. When scientists in Cairo and scientists in Oslo and scientists in Mumbai study the same phenomenon using the same methods, they converge on the same answers. Not because they are culturally identical, they are not, Bu. Two, because the phenomenon they are studying exists independently of their cultural frameworks. The laws of thermodynamics do not vary by postcode. The mechanisms of evolution by natural selection are the same in every country. The speed of light is not a matter of cultural negotiation. The structure of DNA was not waiting to be discovered in one tradition rather than another. This convergence across cultures is, when you think about it carefully, one of the most significant facts we have about the nature of knowledge. It is not trivial. It is not obvious. It is genuinely remarkable that beings shaped by such different cultural histories, carrying such different inherited frameworks, can nevertheless arrive through shared methods of empirical inquiry at shared descriptions of reality. That convergence is itself a powerful argument that those descriptions are tracking something real, something that exists independently of the observer, something that would be true even if no human being had ever been born to notice it. Now, none of this means that the things science has not yet fully explained are therefore explained by any particular religious or cultural tradition. This is a non sequitur that appears frequently in these discussions, and it deserves to be named as such, gently but clearly. The genuine and fascinating uncertainty that surrounds questions of consciousness, of the origins of the universe, of the deep nature of physical laws, these open questions are not invitations to fill the gap with whichever story happens to be culturally local. The honest response to genuine uncertainty is not to reach for the nearest available answer. It is to say, with as much equanimity as we can muster, that we do not yet know, and to describe as precisely as we can the current frontier of what we do know, and how confident we should be in it. This is, I fully acknowledge, ought a comfortable intellectual position. The human mind, that restless, story-hungry, agency-detecting organ we have been discussing, finds open-ended uncertainty genuinely uncomfortable. A story, even an unverified one, even a borrowed one, often feels better than the clean emptiness of honest not knowing. This is entirely understandable. It is, as we have seen, deeply rooted in our evolutionary history. Understanding why we hunger for premature closure does not make the hunger go away. But it does give us the possibility of recognizing it for what it is, and of choosing at least sometimes to wait a little longer before feeding it. And I think there is something genuinely beautiful available in that waiting, something that is in its own way more nourishing than the premature story. When Charles Darwin sat with the extraordinary diversity of life he had observed around the world, he did not rush to a conclusion. He sat with the puzzle for 20 years. He accumulated evidence with extraordinary patience and rigor. He followed the logic wherever it led, even when it led somewhere that made him deeply uncomfortable. And what emerged from that patient, honest, uncomfortable inquiry was one of the most illuminating ideas in the history of human thought, the idea of evolution by natural selection. An idea that, once you have truly understood it, makes the living world not less wonderful, but incomparably more so. The same quality of patient honesty has produced the germ theory of disease, the discovery of the expanding universe, the decoding of the genome, the understanding of plate tectonics. In every case, the reward for sitting honestly with uncertainty, for following the evidence rather than the comfortable story, has been a picture of reality that is stranger, deeper, and more astonishing than anything the comfortable story offered. It is also worth acknowledging, with honesty, that the relationship between geography and belief is not static, and it has never been perfectly rigid. Human beings have always traveled, traded, mixed, argued, and changed their minds. Belief systems have always evolved, sometimes slowly and sometimes with startling speed. What is genuinely new in our present moment is the scale and speed of cultural contact. Young people in Tehran are reading the same philosophy texts as young people in Toronto, Young people in Lagos are watching the same science documentaries as young people in London. The cultural transmission that for most of human history was almost entirely local is now, for many people, irresistibly global. And the effect on belief systems is visible everywhere. In the growth of religious diversity within previously homogeneous societies, in the rise of syncretism and personalized spirituality, in the increasing proportion of people who describe themselves as belonging to no tradition while still experiencing something they can only call a sense of awe. This does not mean that local traditions are disappearing or should disappear. The cultural diversity of humanity is one of its most remarkable features, and there is real wisdom encoded in traditions that have sustained communities through centuries of difficulty. The rituals that mark birth and death and passage into adulthood, the stories that give a community a shared sense of identity and purpose, the ethical frameworks that have been refined through millennia of lived social experience. These things deserve respect and a careful study, not dismissal. But respect and uncritical acceptance are different things. You can honor a tradition and still ask honest questions about it. You can love the culture that shaped you and still examine its claims with the same rigor you would bring to any other claim about the nature of reality. B. Because here is what I have come to believe, and I offer it not as a conclusion but as an observation from a long engagement with these questions. The examined life and the inherited life are not opposites, they are not enemies. The person who has genuinely looked at their inherited beliefs, who has asked the hard questions and sat with the uncertainty and come out the other side still holding some version of those beliefs, that person holds them in a fundamentally different way, with more lightness, with more genuine openness to revision, with less need to defend them against all questioning, with more ability to distinguish between what is essential and what is merely habitual. And a person who has found, through honest examination, that they cannot hold the beliefs they were given, who has had to construct a different framework for navigating the world, that person also deserves respect.
Not pity.
Not suspicion, not the assumption that they have lost something precious without gaining anything in return. Because what honest inquiry always offers, even when it takes away comfortable certainty, is something rarer and more durable. It offers contact with reality as it actually is, rather than reality as we were told it was or as we wished it would be. Let us come back, finally, to our three children. The child in Cairo, the child in Oslo, the child in Mumbai, older now perhaps, sitting somewhere with their own questions, their own doubts, their own moments of genuine wonder. I hope for all three of them the same thing. Not that they will reach any particular conclusion, not that they will abandon or preserve any particular tradition, but that they will be given the gift, because it is a gift of genuine curiosity, the capacity to look at the world with fresh eyes, the courage to ask uncomfortable questions, the intellectual honesty to follow those questions even when they lead somewhere unexpected, and the humility to hold their answers lightly, knowing that the map is never quite the territory, that the best current description of reality is always provisional, always waiting to be refined by the next careful observation. The universe is, by any honest reckoning, an astonishing place. 13.8 billion years old, containing more stars than there are grains of sand on all the beaches of the earth, governed by laws so precise and so mathematically elegant that their discovery has reliably produced in those who discovered them an emotion they can only describe as awe. And on one small, unremarkable planet orbiting one ordinary star in the outer reaches of one galaxy among hundreds of billions, the blind, purposeless process of evolution produced over 4 billion years of experiment and failure and improbable success. Beings capable of asking why, beings capable of looking at the night sky and feeling something, beings capable of recognizing their own cognitive biases, beings capable sometimes of changing their minds. That capacity, that fragile, hard won, endlessly renewable capacity for honest inquiry seems to be the most precious thing about us. More precious than any particular answer we have for, and so far, because the answers will keep changing as they should, as they must, as the history of knowledge repeatedly shows they will. But the capacity to keep asking with rigor and with wonder and with wonder and with genuine openness to whatever the evidence reveals, that capacity is what makes us, in the most literal sense, the universe trying to understand itself. And perhaps that is the most honest place to end. not with a conclusion, not with a verdict, but with a question held open, with the recognition that wherever you were born, whatever you were taught, whatever you currently believe, you have access to the same tools of honest inquiry that have produced every genuine advance in human understanding. Those tools belong to no single culture and no single tradition. They are the common inheritance of the species. What we do with them is still and always up to us.